Welcome back to another episode of The Hit. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where every single week I bring you a leader from our sector to discuss some of the biggest challenges in UK housing today. Today on The Hip, I was delighted to be joined by Wayne Cole, Group Director of Property Safety and Compliance at Places for People. It's really nice to understand Wayne's background from starting life in the Navy and transitioning through the private sector and finally landing in Places for People as the Director of Property Safety and Compliance. It was also nice to speak to Wayne about how he's tackled consistency and creating synergy across the organisation, how important a role culture has played in that change. And also we talk around how he believes AI might shape the future of property safety and compliance for organisations not only across housing but across the wider sector. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. Wayne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. I've not had anyone from property safety compliance before, so here we go.
Strap yourself in, mate. It's about to get rock and roll.
Just for the benefit of the listeners, just give us a bit of an overview of yourself for those that don't know you.
I'm Wayne Cole. I am Group Director of Property Safety and Compliance for Places for People Group. Places for People are pretty much the UK's biggest social enterprise. We have around about 70,000 social housing stock that we own and manage, about 130,000 private rental for various different investment companies, private landlords that we manage on their behalf, 100 leisure centres with 6,000 colleagues and around about 20 million visitors a year. We are a facilities management company in universities and hospitals and such. We're a very, very, very diverse group of about 18 businesses, and my role is I sit across group level and have a helicopter view across the group, and it's a very, very, very interesting environment to work in.
Nice. I mean, I can't wait to unpack it. I mean, that's a lot, but we'll
massive.
Get there. I know. And when I was doing my research on this, and when we were speaking on camera, you obviously started in the Navy. So, like, what inspired you to kind of move away from that career path and ultimately end up where you stand today within housing? Would you say what was the path?
I catastrophically failed my GCSEs and pretty much got D's and E's and F's in everything other than art. I got a C in art that my children love to rib me about all the time because I'm also crap at drawing as well. I joined the Navy at 16 years old as a marine engineer, as a stoker. I went down to HMS Raleigh, the Royal Naval Basic Training School, and then went to HMS Sultan, the Marine Engineering School in Gosport, and then eventually joined HMS Invincible, which at the time was the flagship, the old aircraft carrier. She's gone now, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame. And I wasn't in very long. I wasn't in very long at all. I was only in when I was in my teens. But that time that I was in there, it just... Imagine being 16 and thrust into a world. Well, you know, James, because you joined the army, so you know exactly what I'm saying. But for your listeners, imagine being a 16-year-old kid, who'd been mollycoddled by your mum and dad, grew up on a council estate in Hendon in Sunderland in the northeast of England, and then thrust into a man's world, on board a warship, in a mess with 24 lads. You were the junior. You set your mouth away. You got a slap. You were working in engine spaces, you were working in aircraft spaces on hydraulic systems and all sorts in the middle of the sea, going around the world. Before I joined the Royal Navy, the most furthest I'd ever been was a weekend in London. We used to go on holiday in a caravan in Clayton Bay in Scarborough. The first place I ever went to in the Royal Navy was Istanbul. And I remember steaming up the Bosphorus, watching the sunset, and seeing on the horizon the silhouette of the Blue Mosque, and I can actually smell the spices still. It's absolutely amazing how your memory works. But whoever came up with that advert on TV, I was born in Blythe, but I was made in the Royal Navy. It was very, very, very clever because that was me. The core, the resilience that I've got, the sideways lateral thinking, the problem solving that I have, which is now innate to the way I work, it was born in that environment. But I also knew that it wasn't going to be forever. I was never going to be a lifer. My dad was a scaffolder. He was a foreman in AMEC shipyard on the Tyne, building oil rigs and super tanker oil rig conversions. And he said, well, I'll get you in the yards. Massive nepotism. Couldn't get in a shipyard unless you knew someone, if you were related to someone. So there was absolutely dozens, hundreds of father and son combinations, which made it quite an interesting environment. So, and it was in that environment that I got the interest in health and safety. That's how it started. I was a marine engineer. I was quite highly skilled. I'd served my time, so to speak. I'd done all my task book and everything, and that when I was in the Navy. So I was then thrust in with all of the scaffolders because that's what my dad did, and they had to have a union health and safety rep. No one would get up. I've never really been shy, so I was like, I'll do it. And that's how it started. And also as well, in the time I was in the shipyards, I saw 3 people get killed, and I just thought, this is wrong. It's wrong. And there were 3 young lads, and they'd kissed the girlfriends and the mums goodbye in the morning, and then they didn't go home. And I just felt that was wrong. So my almost evangelical approach to health and safety and compliance and behavioural science was really stemmed from losing people and who were friends, because we're all young'uns and that we're all 19, 20-year-old and that, and that's where the transition into compliance started. But I've always at the core been engineering, construction, because I feel very comfortable in engineering and construction, and that's just evolved into property over the last 25 years. This year I've been doing this profession 25 years. I know all of you, Leah. I look really good.
I was gonna say good skin. And how did the Places for People thing come about? What was the how did it come about, and what enticed you to take that role, would you say?
I've been at Places for People for about 2.5 years. And before that, I was working for Portakabin Group, the modular builder, who pretty much invented modular building. People talk about Portakabins as a noun. It's not. When we were in Portakabin, it was like, no, you call it a Portakabin modular building, So it was really important that brand was so synonymous in working in that environment. I headed up health, safety, and environmental compliance for Europe in Portakabin. We operated across 10 countries, and it was a great organisation. I really, really enjoyed it. I had a fantastic team. I'd been afforded a huge amount of freedom to be able to redesign processes and systems and strategy and recruiting the people I wanted across Europe as well. So that was brilliant. That was brilliant. But I had come from the housing sector. I was director at Home Group for 5 years before joining Portakabin, and it just felt right at the time. And I needed a new challenge, and the whole European thing with Portakabin really excited me. But I knew who Places for People were. I knew who David Cowan was, the old chief executive Places for People, who recruited me into Places for People. And it was just too much of an opportunity, an absolute apex point of my career as I saw it. The most senior opportunity to be that group director, to have directors and heads of reporting into me, to really give the opportunity to be able to change and improve our performance, to improve customers' lives, and coming from brought up in a social housing environment, that was really important to me as well. So it wasn't a no-brainer. I'm not going to sit here and start saying it was an absolute no-brainer, because it wasn't. Because I liked working at Portakabin. It was good fun, and I had a good team around me. But it was just too much of an opportunity. It was just too much of an opportunity to miss out on, really. So yeah, that was the main draw, really. It was the size, the complexity, the challenge. I'm one of those weirdos in life that I don't get scared by size and complexity. I get excited by that. So yeah, it was a brilliant opportunity.
Probably the Navy in you, that I would have thought.
Yeah. I think so. Steaming off into the South Atlantic and not being able to see the horizon, and that absolute, excitement of seeing new things and doing new things, I think it's just been programmed into my DNA at a very small age.
And I'm always interested in this because I'm a big advocate of this, but how important has it been for you to develop your skills in both private and public sector organisation? And how has that rounded your knowledge, but also your ability to create culture and take the best of both worlds and create the role that you're in now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are subtle differences between private and third sector. There just are, and I think one of the things in my profession is there's a heavily focused around competency, legal competency, understanding CDM, understanding fire risk, understanding building risk. But what happens is you travel through your career, and then suddenly at some point, right, you get a little bit more senior, then you get staff. Yeah. Right. And then at first they go, don't worry about your budget. It's a support service budget. It's managed elsewhere. And then you get a bit more senior, right? And then suddenly someone goes, you've got a management accounts meeting with your accountant every month. And you're like, what? Right, well, I've got to manage budgets now. Oh, shit. Right. Okay. How's that work? And I think in private sector, certainly the biggest difference I found in private sector, because you're providing a service for people that are running P&Ls, profit and loss, budget, profit-making businesses, you become acutely commercially aware. And you become aware of the decisions that you need to make are going to cost money. And whether we like it or not, it's not a bottomless purse. It just isn't. So I think in private sector, what it made me was very cost aware, and that forced me to be more innovative, to come up with different solutions and think more laterally and go, the obvious solution would be to go out and spend £250,000 and buy that software system. Yeah. Or we could look at how we measure that, look at how we report on that, look at the system data that we get from that, and then look at how we rationalize a lot of that and do a lot of it ourselves. So it made me certainly more innovative working in private sector because of sometimes a lot of the budget constraints I was under. And when I came across into third sector, where that commerciality in my profession wasn't always prevalent in the way people thought, I've driven that through businesses that I've managed and made it so that we are thinking about being innovative first. We think about the innovation, then we start to build that into that cost model of how it works. So that's one of the subtle, real things that I noticed. The other thing that I've noticed is in third sector, we're a lot more aware of the human capital that exists within a business, the people. We're a lot more aware of the people. I've worked for organizations in the past where you were literally a number.
Yeah, of course.
You were a number, and it doesn't feel like that. It's in my business. It's not public sector, and it's not private. It sits in between.
Yeah, absolutely.
PFP. So it generates profit. We just push 100% of that profit back into the business to serve the communities that we provide services to. And but we're acutely aware of our biggest asset as a business isn't necessarily the 250,000 buildings that we own and manage. It's the 11,500 colleagues that we work with. And I take that responsibility of being that person responsible for ensuring we set the processes and the standards and the culture for their well-being and safety really, really, really seriously.
Yeah, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, but clearly it's complex, this role. I mean, it's the biggest role in what you do that I know of in our sector. So talk us about the directorate that you run in terms of like the size and scale of it, that what's underneath you, what is in your directorate.
So I've got a direct team and then an indirect team. So I've got a team that reports literally, there's a solid line into me. And then I've got a team of senior directors and heads of that. There's a dotted line into them. And that's more of a legacy and structural issue. But from a relationship perspective, doesn't really change the way. If I had my senior SLT with me and we invited you in to the meeting, you would not be able to tell who reports directly into me and who doesn't report directly into me, because I just behave consistently the same way. Yeah. And because I'm a relationship builder. That's really, really important to me. That building positive relationships and trust is the keystone to high performing teams. So my direct team, I have around about 55, 60 people in my direct team. And then there's a further around 20 people in the indirect team. So there's about 80 people in the directorate in health and safety compliance. And I also have safeguarding as well, reporting to me from across the group. And I can succinctly describe what we do in 3 things, because I've designed this into the strategy on a page. So it makes it really easy for people to understand, because you get that when you're in such a big business and you've got that group director role, and people say, what is it that your team does, right? And so this is what we do. 3 things. I like the power of 3, right? We set standards. I'm responsible for 37 standards across the group. Yeah, and these standards at group level are an umbrella standard. And then the business areas have 2 choices: by design and an assurance process of showing that their processes, policies, and procedures are compliant with the group standard, or they adopt the group standard verbatim, because we've got different levels of maturity. And I had to design it in a way to think about mergers and acquisitions and such like that in the future. Yeah, I had to think about that, because all organizations like us get bigger, and there's an aspiration for us to get bigger as well. So we set standards, we give assurance, right? So that second line defensive assurance comes from my team. That comes in the form of auditing. That comes in the form of inspection and such like that from across the group. So yeah, that's we give assurance. And then the third process is we give support. We ensure that this isn't about us just throwing something over the fence and having the business just get on with it. That's not what this is about. This is about ensuring that we put the arm around the shoulder, rolled our sleeves up, and then support them. So in a nutshell, we set standards, we assure governance, we give support.
Amazing. Simple. It sounds simple, but we'll unpack that now, because I know you were brought in to create that consistent synergy across, compliance and the wider PFP group. But how did you set out to achieve that consistency and that synergy? I appreciate that plan helps, but how did you make sure that or how are you making sure that you're creating that synergy and that consistency across the group?
Well, in the first instance, David Cowans gave me some fantastic advice. And David said to me, the people that are the most successful in PFP are the ones that take the time to understand how the business works, because it's a complex old beast. It's a big old beast. So for the first probably 3 months, 4 months, I just went off on almost like a flag visit. I just went off on tour, and I went around all of the business areas, and I met with the chief execs and the managing directors of each of the business area, with the QHSE colleagues, the health and safety colleagues within each of the business areas, and started to get an understanding of how they worked, what they did, what their processes were, what their KPIs were, how they measured things. And what I actually then understood was we had 1,000,001 ways of doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. So I was like, right. So what is it that we want? How are we going to drive consistency and improvement? My time in Portakabin, working in manufacturing, really, this phrase that I've become quite well known for in PFP, I learned it in Portakabin from one of our operations directors, Simon. And this phrase goes, the people driving the process rather than the process driving the people. Now, that's fine if you've got a small business, yeah. And you can wrap your arms around it, yeah, and you don't have to duplicate a lot of things over and over and over again. But if you've got a big organization, right, that you've got products that you need to deliver, like whether it's gas servicing, whether it's fire risk assessment, whether it's induction to contractors onto construction sites, whatever that risk is, whatever that activity is, and it needs to be replicated from Inverness to Exeter, yeah, it has to have a process behind it, and it has to have measurement. So what it should really be is the process driving the person, not the person driving the process. And that's how you get consistency of approach. So we did this big gap analysis, this big mosaic of gap analysis from across the group, and identified the core processes and activities that needed a set standard that the entire organization would work to. And that's why we came up with it was actually 42 different standards. We're collapsing them. There's still too many. There's still too many. 37
better than a million though, right?
So. Yeah. Better than a million. We're way better than where we were. But 37 is still too many. So we're starting to collapse them together. And we're also starting to measure it to see, well, unless it's something that has to go all the way across the group, it gets devolved down into the business area. And then we just have a look at it from an assurance perspective. So that was the main thing of how we set those standards out and had a look at it. Then there's that really old-fashioned saying, if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. So we designed an assurance methodology for audits from across the group that captured all of the requirements of the standards. It captured all of the requirements of the standards and legal standards as well. And the main principle around that was I wanted to do quite a mature method of auditing. And I remember when I originally presented this to the exec, they were a little bit confused by it, because I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to design all of these audit question sets with my team. And we're going to post them on the intranet, and we're going to send it to the business area a month before we audit them. And I was like, aren't you telling them what you're going to look at? I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell them what we're going to look at. Right. Well, that's just counterintuitive. That's not how we've done auditing before. And I said, right, well, what is the purpose of the output of audit? To get assurance and to drive continual improvement. So if it's to drive continual improvement, why wouldn't I tell them? Because then they can prepare, they can design things, they can make sure that it's right. The audits are going to be sophisticated enough to tell if the paint's wet and they've just done it the week before. It just will. It just will. We're forensic auditors. We're going to know. We're going to know. You can't cheat the system, but it's a more mature way of auditing, and everything's planned. And we do some unannounced things sometimes, but that's mainly because an incident's occurred, and we need to go in and have a look at it and go, right, what's happened there, and what's happened here, so to speak. So yeah, it's been a very mature way of doing it. It's driven improvement. We then set some consistent KPIs for the entire organization to aim towards. We had this initiative called safety improvement opportunities. Wasn't exactly intuitive, so we changed it to don't walk by, which I've had in numerous other businesses. That's a little bit more intuitive. That you don't need to explain to someone what it is. Don't walk by. So you don't want me to walk by? No, I don't want you to walk by. I want you to do something about it, but I want you to tell us what you've done. So and we've seen consistent increase in that reporting. We've seen a decrease in our accident frequency rate. We've seen an increase in our incident frequency rate. We've seen an increase in our colleague engagement scores as well. So yeah, it's working. It's working, but it's not the future.
No, but it's simple and it's effective, and it's getting back to the brilliant basics that any organisation needs, which you can then learn.
It's really weird that you said that, because when I was at Home Group, me and a couple of customer service colleagues went to a customer service seminar by the director of customer service from Virgin Airlines. And Virgin Airlines came up with a strapline that I thought was absolutely amazing. Brilliant basics, magic touches. Brilliant basics, magic touches. So if you're cabin crew, you don't give a shit if the inlet valve on engine number 3 has been serviced 3 weeks before you got on the plane, in line with its standard operating procedure. You don't care. All you want to know is the plane going to blow up? No. Because then you don't need to worry about that. So you can be truly focused on what your job is.
Clever.
Given that excellence in customer service. Now, my job is to make sure that entire cultural environment of compliance and well-being and process adherence and transparency and trust and well-being and improvement, that happens. And colleagues don't need to think about it because it's just there. And they don't need to think about it because they can get on with doing that brilliant thing that they've got to do for customers.
Yeah, it's good. And it's such a simple thing, but it's so effective. But the other thing that I know we talked about a bit off camera, which I wanted to talk about a bit more, is about this Beyond Compliance project that you created. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that's really interesting.
So we're 2.5 years in. We're 2 years in. We're 2 years in now to the current strategy around building the foundation of compliance across the group. And that's exactly what compliance is. Compliance is not the long-term answer. It isn't. Compliance is your foundation for performance improvement. So if you've got poor compliance, by improving compliance, you will improve the performance of the business. You just will. You will. Yeah. You'll have more process adherence. You'll have better consistency. You'll have better quality of the products that you're delivering. You'll have less lost time accidents. You'll have less near misses, less improvement opportunities, less near misses, less lost time accidents, less RIDOs, less time off. All of these things will improve. All of those things, all those metrics are improved, and they've improved in every organization I've ever worked in where I've implemented a compliance improvement methodology. But you'll plateau. You will plateau at some point. And then what you start to get into is the psychology of risk, why people do what they do. Yeah. There's a brilliant book out there. It's called Surrounded by Idiots. Yeah, it's a great book. I love that book. It's a fantastic book. I've got an aspiration of writing a book in the future. I'm going to call it Why People Do Stupid Shit.
Yeah, I love it.
And because the reality of it is people don't do stupid shit. They just don't.
Yeah.
People don't do stupid shit. The environment that they work in, that's encouraged them to make that mistake. Peer group pressure has encouraged them to make that mistake. Lack of training and competence in their specific activity has encouraged them to make that mistake. Scope creep, of what they're supposed to do. Oh, yeah, you're really good at doing that. Would you mind doing that for me as well? I've never done that before, but yeah, all right then. And the next thing you know, I've lost all the fingers. So it's that kind of environmental thing. And I became acutely aware of this a few years ago. And beyond compliance really is our next phase of our health and safety strategy that it's right in its infancy. And we're starting to look at what are the areas that we're identifying where it is perceived as being a cultural thing. So we're getting feedback from colleagues that say like, oh, well, it's too complex to understand, so I'm not doing it. All right, okay. So one of the things that we're going to start measuring in the business is effort. Right. We're actually going to start measuring effort. And in my world, we're going to start measuring effort. Now, I've implemented an organizational-wide, ubiquitous incident reporting system since I came into the group. It's the first group-wide system used by every single business in the group. Yep, and it's other software providers are available, but we've gone with Eco Online. That used to be AirsWeb. We went through a procurement exercise, and those guys won. And it's been brilliant. It's been really, really good. One of the things that we're going to start measuring now, from a cultural perspective, as part of Beyond Compliance, is we're going to start asking colleagues, how easy is it to use the system? Yep. Now, if you think about all the way through your career, right, how many times has a leader, a manager, a supervisor, a foreman, a lance corporal, a corporal, a sergeant, an RSM, never an RSM, ever asked you, is your job hard to do? Is your job easy to do? Yeah, never. It's not intuitive. But if we're asking these questions, that's just one component of understanding the culture of what you have created by building a compliance culture. Yeah. A couple of other questions that we're going to start asking people is do you trust us? Do you trust us? Do you trust me? Do you trust me as a leader? Do you trust us? Do you feel confident to be able to put your hand up if you've made a catastrophic error, or even an error, not even a catastrophic error? Yeah, if you've made an error, do you feel confident to raise that and say, actually, I've made a mistake? Or do you feel that the business where you work, the area of the business where you work, is kind of encouraging you to just fix that shit and move on? Yeah. I want to learn these things. I want to understand these things, because once you start to understand those things, you can then go back to your compliance components and refine them. Yeah. To make them better. And then what I've also done is this has been a very recent thing, probably only about in the last 6 months. These 37 standards that we do, I've said, if it's a gas compliance standard, I want gas engineers involved in the design of it. I don't want a bunch of corporate managers and leaders and directors being the ones that, and health and safety people and compliance people. I don't want, obviously they need to be involved because they've got that technical legal skill set. But I want, for our electrical compliance, we got our electricians, frontline electricians, and brought them in and said, don't worry, we're going to give you a bacon sandwich and that and a cup of coffee. Be ready. And then we sat down with them and we said, how do you think this will work? Will this work? And the feedback I got from that was no one's ever asked us that before. Right. So just unpack that for a second. No one's ever asked them how a process works, that they're the ones that's going to be carrying it out on a daily basis.
Mad, isn't it?
It's mental.
It is mental.
If you think about it, right, we've been doing that, or rather we haven't been doing that for years and years and years. Now, there are some really forward-thinking organizations that just do that. And you know what? Bravo. Brilliant. Well done. That is awesome. That is great. We weren't one of them, but we will be one of them. And we are doing that now. We're doing that now. And we're getting a much richer, a much, much, much richer outcome.
How much have you seen of that in your career? I'm interested. So how many accidents are actually because people are nervous about putting their hand up and saying, I did something wrong? How much of it happens in our industry, do you think?
Quite a lot when you investigate an accident and then you find out that it's happened before.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's that I've come across quite a few situations where that exact scenario has happened before. I remember, when you're on a new build construction site and we build a birdcage loading platform on the scaffold, and it's got that pivoting brickies lift. It's got a bricky gate on it, and you can pull it back one way, and the telehandler can load the pallet of bricks up, drop it down. It creates a barrier behind, and then you shut it down that way, and then the lads and lasses who are going to uploading the bricks and loading them out for the bricklayers can work relatively safely. Well, quite a long time ago, about 20 years ago, when I first saw that particular design, I thought it was really clever. I thought, isn't that good? Isn't that good? Human beings are like water, right? They will always find the path of least resistance. Water carved out the Grand Canyon. It's quite a powerful thing, water. It will always find the path of least resistance. And humans are the same. We are inanely programmed to find shortcuts. It's programmed into our DNA. We will just do that. So you've got to think about that when you're designing a methodology. And what these lads had done in this scenario is they'd come up with a way to load it out so the telehandler could stand with the pallet on. They could throw the bricks off, and then the telehandler could pull back all in one movement without opening and shutting it. It saved about 20 seconds a movement. 20 seconds, but they were on price work, so they were compelled to do it faster. So psychologically, they thought they were being quicker. What happened was a young lad bent down, fell forward, went through the gap underneath and fell three scaffold lifts down and broke bones. When we investigated it and we interviewed people and spoke to some, younger lads, and they were saying, we've been doing this for months. And all we do is when the safety man comes round, we just do it right. And the site gaffer knew about it as well. This is when I was a consultant. The site gaffer knew about it as well. So, for me, I think it still happens in industry. I think if we don't think it happens, we're being naive. So I think the involvement again in getting colleagues involved, those frontline colleagues involved in how you review things is really important. One thing that we're going to be starting in the new year is the What Happened Here forum.
Right.
Kind of like cold case. So we're going to take incidents and such like that. We're going to get a forum of colleagues together. We've already done a trial on it. It worked. We got really good feedback. So we're going to launch it in the new year. Get operational colleagues in as well that are related to the incident type. We're going to anonymize it and redact it so that it's not, so we're being data compliant and we're not talking about people's names and things like that. But get their view on it. Cold. How did that happen? If you were on site, what corners could you cut to make that happen? Now that's not being disrespectful to a colleague to say that every colleague's going to cut corners. It's just not. It's just getting another view on how they operate and such like that. And again, you're changing the culture because then they'll go away. It's like dropping a pebble in a pond. They'll then go away with their teams and go, they're actually involving us in decision making here.
Yeah.
So up in the head office, they're actually involving us in decision makings. Because I keep saying to people, I live in an ivory tower, and sometimes I need to smash the doors down to get out.
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously it's refreshing speaking to someone from your background that thinks slightly differently, I would say. You're not stereotypical in the way that you think. I think two questions. Firstly, how important does culture play a role in all of this in terms of
Massive.
it's all good and well having every process, but you've already mentioned a few things. One thing I was thinking about the near miss accident thing, if you get berated or you get really severe discipline from telling someone you've had a near miss, you're not going to do it the next time. That creates bigger problems down the road. That's a cultural thing. But how much is behavioural change a thing for you in your role to make sure that people buy into this at a level?
It's everything. It just is. It's absolutely everything for me now. The older and more experienced, and dare I say, wiser I've gotten. For me, why people do what they do is becoming more and more and more important. It's absolutely becoming more and more and more important. There was a very clever man, much cleverer than me, Peter Drucker. He came up with quite a famous saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yep.
And I'm a firm believer in that. You can come up with the best strategy in the world with all the amazing KPIs and the measurement opportunities and the way that's going to increase our EBITDA and it's going to increase our customer engagement score and CSAT and all this and that, you know. But after you've launched it, if colleagues walk away from that scenario and go, fuck off, I'm not doing that. Yeah. I want to do it the way I've always done it. Your strategy's failed. It has failed. And you can apply that to a organizational strategy, to a health and safety strategy. Greg Reed, our new chief exec, is brilliant from a strategic perspective. And one of the things that he's really encouraged us to do is to create these strategies on a page that are relevant to our business areas. So it brings the strategy to life, and they all stem from the main overarching group strategy. So that's been a real revelation for me in how to communicate and make sure that there's a consistent approach for strategic launch. And but yeah, making sure that if we involve our colleagues along the journey, then we've got way better chance of those colleagues walking away and going, yeah, I believe in this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that.
And how have you gone about that? Because like, I appreciate you've just said make them part of the journey, and I get that. When I've worked for bigger businesses, I get initiative fatigue. Right, today, guys, we're going to be doing this. Tomorrow, we're going to do this. Blah, blah. But how have you made it, like, take this in the right way, respectfully? Compliance for everyone is not their number one. Like, they don't go, oh my God, I can't wait to see Wayne today and him tell me about compliance. How have you made it exciting and the content a little bit more engaging so people want to buy into it?
I have been told I am quite evangelical about these things anyway, so I do try and make it a bit more exciting. We just break it down and just make it relevant to them, being absolutely frank. When we launched the group strategy, we've got a leisure centre in Sheffield, and it's a tennis centre. And we invited 400 colleagues from across the group to the leisure centre to do the strategic launch of our new strategy. We live streamed it across the organisation as well. Yep. We have an initiative in the business that it was just on at 12 o'clock today. Every month, Greg, our chief exec, our group chief exec, it's called Drop the Mic, and he goes around the UK and we live stream it across all 11,500 colleagues have access to it from across the group, and it's becoming a really important comms channel. We've embraced Yammer recently for our internal communications channel, and the SLT, the group SLT. You think of there's 11,500 colleagues or so across the business, and there's about 100 of us in group SLT, senior directors, chief execs, managing directors, and such. And we are openly encouraged to use Yammer as that. Getting straight to your colleagues and asking them and putting polls up. You know, I love it. I think sometimes I see it almost not patriarchal in a negative sense, but it's almost like I'm the dad and sometimes I like my family. And when you see the teams going off and doing stuff and you had no idea that they were doing it and you're like, God, it's really cool. That's such a good idea. And then you're like, interact with them and go, this is brilliant. And they're asking polls on a new process that we've launched. They're asking colleagues a poll. How have you found this? How are you finding it? So I think utilizing the power of technology, the likes of Yammer and communication tools and other things like Workplace and things like that, are really, really important in getting that colleague engagement. And also then having a really good comms team that coordinate a lot of this initiative and such, so you don't end up with that initiative-itis and initiative fatigue where you just think, oh, no, not so.
Here we go again.
It can be, I'm going to be honest, that can be frustrating as a senior director that your comms is on a work stack. Yeah, your comms is on a work stack and things have got to get launched in order. But you respect the fact that it's done for the right reason so that we don't disengage colleagues. So for me, it's we've got a brilliant comms team and headed up by a right character, John Greaves. He's great. So yeah, he's it's a fun place to work at the minute, mate. It's good. I enjoy it.
Love it. Obviously, housing podcast. Be remiss of me not to ask this question, but clearly, it's not all of your role. This, but I'm interested to understand where you think we're at as a sector around safety and compliance.
I think when we talk about our sector and safety, we're talking about building safety, really, which is obviously hugely important. And I think we're all acutely aware and remember those tragic events that triggered a lot of what we're doing now from Grenfell. But obviously, we've got a lot of people collateral within the businesses as well. And there's a lot of people working the sectors from across the sector. So, yeah, I think sometimes we forget about people. But really, when we're talking about safety, we're talking about building safety. There's a lot of focus at the minute around 18 metres and above. For us, that's not a huge number of buildings, and we're well underway with that. I think we're going to get more of a challenge when we start looking at 11 metres and above, because that's thousands. That for us, for PFP, that's thousands. What we're making sure is we're future-proofing our approach to incorporate those types of buildings as well. I think for the sector, data is going to be a challenge. I think historic data is going to be a challenge for the sector. The regulator, the regulators ask for data and information with sometimes in a way that they think that it's just digitized, sitting on a system. Some of this is legacy, some of this is historic data where I don't think there's any organization in sector that's truly finished that digital journey. If there are, I'd like to talk to them. They're just not. So for me, data, good data as well, not just data, because you can get absolute diabolical data that tells you the wrong thing and sets you off in the wrong direction. So I think the challenge around data and data integrity is going to be a real important thing for us. There is one thing that I spoke at the Building Safety Week at Westminster last year, and I definitely pissed off a few software providers in the audience. But I don't care. I'm not bothered. I don't work for a software provider. And it was just beware of these providers that are selling you the idea of something that just doesn't exist. Yeah, they're selling the idea of, just give us your data and our system will cleanse it all for you. Will it? Crap. Will it hell? No, it won't. So you've got to build that data cleanse into your evolving strategy as you start to move from electronic data to true digital data. Electronic data is having an interactive PDF of a fire risk assessment. That's electronic. That's not digital. Digital is it was put in a digital format. Yeah, and it is truly digitized. You can break down the individual components of it. You can easily dissect it. You can easily slice and dice that data and measure it and put it into risk profiles and risk software and such like that,
I've not thought of it that way. And the other thing I was thinking is, surely the further you go back, the worse the data becomes, right? Is that right?
100%. You've got to think about it. There's a lot of providers that have been around for a very, 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 very long time. A very long time. I've been around long enough to remember when we used to do audits on triplicate acetate paper. Yeah. And then we'd fax it to each other. A fax. And that was like, wow, I had a pager. So yeah. I remember I worked for one of the development companies of London Underground in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I was a lead QHSE advisor. And I remember seeing a software system called Build Online. And it was designed where you could scan everything into PDF and load up all of your construction phase plans and your risk assessments. And then your colleague could open them up on site on a computer. And we were like thinking, this is like Mars, man. This is like a Mars rover. This is the future. That was 22 years ago. And I look at it now and I think in some circumstances, it's still the same.
Yeah,
it hasn't
like
evolved
Blockbuster versus Netflix, though, isn't it?
It is. It's exactly. It's a good analogy. Yeah, it's exactly. Can you imagine? Like this. We're not utilizing this.
I know, it's crazy.
We're not utilizing that. Is probably the greatest invention in the 21st century.
By far.
One
of the worst as well.
I can pretty much capture any piece of history and information that's ever happened in the last 200 years, but we spend most of our times looking at cat and dog memes.
Yeah.
It's just mental. TikTok. We just need to start TikTok. God,
following Wayne Cole on TikTok.
Doom scrolling.
I've got a question because I'd be interested. I mean, it'd be a funner place. I know that for a fact. But if you were in charge of housing across the whole sector, what would you change? What would be some of the things you'd implement?
I think I would make things a little bit more detailed. I think sometimes I really, really appreciate the health and safety executives challenge. Yeah, they're an enforcer, right? They are an enforcer. They're trying to educate people and they're an enforcer. And, I always used to laugh, right? When they design a piece of legislation and then they design an ACOP, an approved code of practice, to tell you how to do it. Now, my simplistic legal brain was like, so why didn't you just write the legislation in the language of the ACOP? And then you wouldn't have to write a document to tell you how to read the document, So I would try to simplify things and give proper detail of the how. Because you know what? We've become so terrified in a litigious society. Like the health and safety executive has got that challenge of, we can't tell you how to do it because if we tell you how to do it and you do it and it goes wrong, that puts us at risk and we're in enforcement. And I get that perpetual circle of risk and assurance. I understand that. But if I was in charge and I'm looking at trying to prevent people from dying, I think that's a risk worth taking. Yeah. So I would try and simplify things and make the message coming from the various multiple agencies, that large organizations. I say regulators because it's multiple. Yeah. There's lots of them that we have to comply with. And if I was in charge of it all, I would say, make things simpler, easier to understand, and tell people what good looks like. Tell people what good looks like.
Yeah, that's fair. And as we move forward, and this is crazy how much this has evolved already.
Vote Wayne, I think is what it, just vote Wayne. I'll fix it.
Vote Wayne. But as we look to the future, and this has moved loads recently, I went on to write a LinkedIn post today and it said, AI will write this post. What do you want to talk about? And I thought, wow, this is going to be a whole new world that we all have to deal with. But if we look at AI from a housing perspective and or a compliance perspective, what are you thinking? What's going through your mind at the moment? How will it play a role? Will it be important?
I think it's going to play an important role in that it's going to help us do more. Now, I'll give you some specific examples. So ChatGPT, we were playing around with it and we're starting to look at AI as a business now. But I'm not talking about the business now. I'm talking about my team, my director.
Yeah, of course.
We were playing with ChatGPT. So I invented a building, right? This wasn't a real building. I invented a building. 24 stories, two staircases, linked alarm system, sprinkler system in the communal areas, 4 access and egress points at ground level, no one with any real serious mobility issues. Design me an emergency evacuation plan. I put that into ChatGPT, right? I put that into ChatGPT. ChatGPT produced me an emergency evacuation. I also told it was in the UK as well.
Yeah.
Because if you don't tell it in the UK, it'll default to America. And it'll start saying all weird Americanisms. It produced a emergency evacuation plan for that building that I gave a very high level scope to, very, very high level scope to, in about 4 seconds. Right? I'm not joking. It was typing it out in front of me. And it was about three pages long. Even had a table. It even put a table. It wasn't just text. It put a table in there as well. I was like, yeah, wow, this is unreal. So I gave it to one of my team. The first thing that they said is, "Oh my God, we're not getting that bit. We're not buying that building, are we?" So it's not a real building. I just did it. To test ChatGPT. Can you have a look at it? Can you generate some questions of what the gaps are? And by the time we'd finished it, it was about 75% there.
Right.
And it took 4 seconds. So I said to one of my team, obviously, you would have to consult the fire risk assessment, the EWS1 form, the PAS 9980 form, all of the various different, any peeps that were in place. You would have to consult that, right? So it's going to take a bit longer than 4 seconds, right? We know that. But I said to one of my team, if that was your building and I give you that to look at, right, and do an emergency evacuation plan for a building safety case for, in line with the Building Safety Act and to the regulator. How long would it take you to do that? Realistically, I knew that because we're already doing building safety cases now, in line with the deadline. That's been extended. Surprise, surprise. And he said a good 4 or 5 days. A good 4 or 5 days. So I think what ChatGPT is, for me, my personal view of AI is it's going to be able to do 2 things that I'll find really, really useful. It's going to help us to get more efficient in some of the process design and communication design and such like that we do. Yeah, it's going to make us more efficient around that. And then also, when it's truly linked into systems, it's going to be able to do some of the analytics for us. We always used to say the analytics side of it has to be human. Right, so you can get like the incident management system that we use that does quite brilliant trend analysis, and it'll show you trends on various different things and incident types and such, and causation types and all of this type of stuff. But add AI into that, and the AI bit will add what the human bit does now, which is the analysis, the so what.
Yeah.
If you don't do all of that, this could happen. Now, the human then will look at this could happen and go, right, what do we need to do? How's that going to work? What's the inspection program? So ChatGPT or AI is a thing that's in the ether. It's not a physical thing. It's a system. It's still going to. We manage communities. We build communities. We manage buildings. We engage with customers. That requires humans. I think AI is just going to ultimately make us more efficient and effective of doing those true human-facing jobs, unless some absolute idiot decides to put one inside a robot, and then we've got Terminator.
That's we've got some. I agree totally. And as we wrap up, a couple of other things I wanted to ask, and appreciate. I'm conscious of your time here, but first one is, and you've probably mentioned some of them, especially around the height of buildings and stuff, so I can see that. But what are some of the other key challenges you think we might be in for in the sort of property safety compliance sector over the next 5 or 10 years? What are you thinking about?
I think the whole net zero carbon agenda is going to have an impact, because you're talking about buildings, and as soon as you talk about buildings, you come into my world then, because you've got to build a building, you've got to refurb a building. That's my world. So I think net zero is going from a health and safety compliance perspective. I think health and safety compliance colleagues need to start leaning into colleagues. That's just start getting your elbows out and get into meetings that they're talking about net zero and the carbon agenda, because some of the initiatives will generate physical risk. So you're better off being at the table so you can help them mold and understand that better than being, for want of a better word, done to. So I think net zero is going to have is continuing to and will continue to have a big impact on us. I think the focus around the height of buildings is going to become quite wider in its scope, which will generate way more volume of work, just gargantuan volumes of work. I don't think the regulators are set up yet to do that. I think there's challenge around the regulators being ready. Like I said, the deadline for the registration and submission of buildings has already been pushed back. And, we kind of thought that was going to happen, but we're still aiming for the end of September, October anyway. So we're not taking the foot off the gas from that perspective to do that. I think we're going to have a skills shortage, a skills issue. You don't need to be a scientist or a behavioural psychologist to just go out and have a look on construction sites and you just see the age of people on construction sites. We're not bringing through enough young people. Yeah, we're not bringing through enough young people. I'm 49. I know it's unbelievable. I just look and I just think, wow, I take a huge responsibility to make sure I'm bringing younger people through. We've got our first graduate in the team, nice. which is brilliant. She brings a different view. I've got people in my team who are all in the mid and young 20s as well. But one thing that we will do is we're going to create an apprenticeship, as well in the future. So we're definitely going to hit with a skills shortage. There's numerous reasons for that. You can start getting political and talking about Brexit and mass migration challenges and such like that, about how we've lost a huge section of trade society moving back to Europe. Whatever your political views are, the reality of it is we've got a trade shortage and it's going to get worse. And the housing shortage, that's a challenge. That is going to be a challenge. The housing shortage, an affordable housing shortage, is going to be a challenge. I love when these politicians just whip these numbers out of fresh air. Oh, yeah, we need to build 10,000 homes. Mate, have you got any idea what it's like to build 10,000 houses? Have you got any idea
materials,
what that takes? Supply chain, skills, land, materials, risk, cost. These politicians band numbers around where you just think you don't know what you're talking about.
I agree.
So I think the sector and other sectors have got some significant challenges over the next 5 to 10 years.
No, I agree. And just to wrap up, I suppose, final thing from you is what you're looking forward to. So certainly you really have, progressed in your career, but what are you looking forward to still achieve in your career? And I suppose what would good look like for you at P4P in the near, medium, long term, really?
I think for me, getting an understanding that we truly are thinking about culture and the psychology of risk within the business. Yeah. That to me is the next evolution for us. And when we're getting that, we do the big colleague survey, Great Place to Work Index, and seeing us climb that will be really positive as well, and it'll be a really good indicator from that perspective. That would be my next 3 to 5 year aspiration from that perspective. From a personal perspective, just be getting better at leadership. I stopped referring to myself as managing people a long time ago. And I refer to myself as a leader. I felt quite pompous when I used to first started to say that, but I am. That's what I am. I'm a leader. I set standards. I design strategy. I try to encourage and mentor and develop people. So, getting better at leadership and enhancing my skill set and knowledge around psychological risk. That's part of my development.
Love it.
As long as I've thought like that, the promotions, the bigger jobs have just happened. That's just happened. They've been a consequence of thinking like that rather than thinking the other way around.
I think
the one time I've thought that way around, I ended up going into a job that I just thought, no, I don't like it.
Enjoy. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to speak to you, because I think it's been great having you on, and I look forward to seeing where you get with this. But I do think that you make what some people will describe as quite a serious subject fun and engaging. And actually, I think the more we do that, the more people will engage. The more they engage, the more you'll sort that behavioural piece out. The more you sort that out, it becomes a much better place to be, doesn't it? So I think your personality does shine in this world in terms of...
well, thank you. I try to. Let's get right, mate. It's a dour subject, isn't it? So,
well, you said it, not me. But I know it's not.
I want to try and make it fun. It's actually one of our people promises, you know.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah.
Have fun.
But it doesn't have to be this serious, does it? Like,
no,
you've made it non-serious. So
I have, one of the things I've implemented in across my entire directorate now. I did it in my group team when I first came into the business, and I've got it across the entire directorate now. Every week they've got to have a check-in, right? Can ask for 30 minutes, depending on the size of the team, 30 minutes, an hour, generally on Teams it is. You can do it face-to-face if you want. And you are not allowed to talk about work. Not allowed to talk about work, right?
Yeah.
To check in. It's a psychological check-in, just to make sure everyone's all right. And I had generally asked 2 questions. What did you do at the weekend? And what have you got planned next weekend?
Yeah.
If you think about it, we spend more conscious waking hours with our colleagues than we do conscious waking hours with our own families. Why wouldn't you give a shit about what's happening in your colleague's life? Yeah, they're struggling. They've got relationship issues. One of the parents is poorly. They've lost a pet. Whatever that is, why wouldn't you care about that? Yeah. And that, when you start to do that, the trust thing starts to happen. When you start to get trust in a team, that's when you start to get that high performing curve.
Yeah.
The next thing is you start to argue with each other, but it's constructive. I don't get that. I don't understand that. It's kind of like that forming, storming, norming, performing. It's that whole kind of curve, but trust sits at the center of that. So yeah, for me, that kind of thing excites me. Amazing. Regulation 4 of the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, that doesn't really excite me, to be honest.
And it's par for the course in what you do. But I mean, thank you so much for taking the time out. Honestly, it's been a brilliant episode, and I can't wait to share it with the listeners. But
no, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been good fun.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Hip. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.